Okay, I think we're just about live. I'm going to leave this another couple of minutes before people, to allow people to filter in and stuff. If you can hear me and see me and I'm coming through all clear, can you just type something into the chat box? I believe I've opened it. This is the first time I've done a Google Hangout like this, and I think I've done everything right, but I'm not too sure. So yeah, if you can hear me and you can see me, please just add something into the chat box or email me at matt@turndog.co or tweet me at turndog_million, just so I know that I'm coming through loud and clear. I've been trying to do the Q&A thing, but it seems that the feature is disabled, so I'm going to focus on the chat box instead. But I hope you're having a fantastic day. So yeah, if you can hear me, let me know how it's going. We're going to get into things in just a couple of minutes. I'm excited to share the book process that I take to structure everything and make everything nice and organized. And yeah, hopefully you can take something from it throughout, and we'll do a bit of a Q&A at the end. So yeah, if you please add something to the group chat box, let me know you can hear me and see me, or send me an email at matt@turndog.co. We'll just leave it a couple more minutes, and I suppose I will tell you about my day so far. I've been catching up. I had a fantastic few days down in Torquay with the family. I took Kid Turn Dog to meet his cousins for the first time. It was absolutely fantastic and wonderful. And yeah, it was a great little getaway. But always, as always, the tough time to come back is that you have a lot of email and a lot of things to catch up on. And that's exactly what I've been doing these last couple of days. So today I was writing a little bit about the successful mistake, and I was catching up on various email and little bits and pieces. And I also met with what looks like it's going to be my editor to be for I Am Love You. And although this how to structure your book isn't about I Am Love You, I certainly took a lot of learnings from the I Am Love You process and the success mistake too. So I'm excited to just break down my process to give you a bit of an insight into what we're going to cover today. I'm going to go through basically it's kind of a 4 or 5 step process that takes you through what to do before you start the first draft, and then how to actually write your first draft. Hopefully that will help you in your book writing needs. And I'd love to know whether you are writing your book at present, or if you've just got a plan to do so at some point in the future. So again, if you're there and you can let me know, you can do so in the group chat, which should be somewhere on the right of the screen, like this way, I think it should be. Or you can email me at matt@turndog.co. I'm going to be checking my emails throughout and answering any questions that you may have. So yeah, we're going to be going through that process. It's a 4 or 5 step process, and it's something that I've iterated over time. So yeah, we've got a few things to go through. So I'm just going to get started. I'm sure other people are going to jump on throughout the period. And yeah, if you've got any questions along the way, add them into the chat box to the right, or email me at matt@turndog.co. But for the time being, I'm going to put it on a screen share so you can see the little presentation that I did. I did for a webinar a couple of weeks ago now. Oh, wow. Present to everyone. That's a little weird. I don't really know what's coming up. I'm going to stop screen sharing for a second because that did not work. I'm going to try that again. Okay, I'm hoping this is going to share my page. I'm just going to start going through things. And if there is any issues, I'm hoping you can tell me via email. So yeah, email me at matt@turndog.co if there's any issues. Fantastic. Thank you ever so much, Leah. Yeah, I'm hoping you can see my screen now, and it should say stage 2, creating your book structure. So if you can't see that, please give me a quick email, Leah. It would be great for you to send a quick email. It was showing up all strange on my screen, but I'm hoping you can see it. And yeah, we shall begin. So I always like to use a great deal of technology when it comes to my book writing. I like to use cloud-based things, but when it comes to structuring my book, I take a fairly simple offline version, and it all begins with the first step in this, and it's what I consider the bullet pointed period of your book structure. You see, no matter what type of book you're writing, whether it's fiction or non-fiction, you start with a great deal of ideas in your heads, and it can range from the book title to various chapters to individual stories or quotes or references. And it's just a beehive. It's a swarm of activity, and it's very difficult to begin when you've got all that. So you need to begin with getting all those ideas from your head down onto the page. And I start with just a bullet pointed list. It's as simple as that. I know it might sound overly simple, and you can do this using an app like Evernote, or you can use it just using a piece of paper. And the whole point is that you can just add to this over time. I quite often will start my bullet pointed list over a period of a few weeks once the idea of a book starts to ferment, and I'll just revisit it. I'll spend a few afternoons here and there to write as many ideas as I can. So I'll say, right, for the next hour, I'm going to get as many ideas about this book onto the page. But it also allows me to add to this list as and when throughout the week, because you never know when an idea is going to hit. So it is always good to just have this bullet point list, ideally before you start your book and while it is still an idea. So if you give it a bit of an idea of a success mistake, if you don't know a great deal about the success mistake, it's a book that I began writing around 2.5, 3 years ago. I interviewed 160 some entrepreneurs about their big mistake and how they transferred it into a humongous success. I've learned so much along this process, not just from the entrepreneurs themselves and all of the aspects of writing and building a business, but how to actually write a book too. I'd written a couple of novels at this point, but I'd never written a nonfiction book like this. So I had to approach my structure, my organization in a completely different way. And it all began with a bullet point list. So if you can imagine, I had a lot of stories, a lot of ideas. There was lots of different types of mistakes that were shining through. It really was an absolute beehive of information. So I had to just get all these ideas down. So the success mistake is split into 7 stages. I based it around the 7 stages of grief. So during this bullet point list, it's where I came up with this idea. I placed things down like shock and pain and bargaining. I thought of different subtitles, attributes of a mistake, and when the warning signs hit, and what type of pain there is. I thought about particular types of stories from certain individuals and how it would link to certain ideas. At this point with your bullet point list, there is no such thing as a right or wrong answer. It's just a case of getting your ideas from your brain onto the page. So when you come to your next step, you're able to start organize them and framework them and put them into some kind of coherent thought. Because I'm a firm believer that so long as something remains in your head, so long as an idea remains in your head, it doesn't exist. It only exists once you get it down on paper. Now, depending on your book and depending on whether it's a novel or non-fiction or a short book or whatever it might be, this bullet point list might be anywhere from 20 points long to 220 points or 1,000 points long. It really doesn't matter. It's just getting ideas down at this stage. And in an ideal world, you will do this a couple of weeks at least, maybe months, or maybe even a year before you start the actual book. The more ideas you get down in this process, in my opinion, the better. Now that leads us to the next stage, when things become a little bit more coherent. And I move from the online world to the offline world. Like I say, I'm a big fan of technology. I absolutely love it. I love to use cloud-based apps, and I'm a big fan of things like Wunderlist and Evernote. And when it comes to writing my book, Scrivener is where it's all at. But although I might write my bullet pointed list in Scrivener, I'll very much take it offline and I'll use post-its or little cue cards. So I encourage you to do the same, because there's something about using your actual hands to move stuff around and get your ideas. And I've tried to use the online technology before. There's various different apps and storyboarding apps out there and technologies and softwares. It's just not quite the same. And it all begins with your upper layer. So if we break a book down into a few sections, and I'm going to use the success and mistake as the example throughout this, because this is where it was really relevant for me, and it's where this idea of how to structure your book came to light, when I had to tackle all these many entrepreneurs and their stories and the various different elements of this book. If you think about the top layer being the success and mistake and its premise basically is to share an entrepreneur's great mistake and help you, to be entrepreneur, the new entrepreneur still trying to figure it out, how to overcome these mistakes and turn them into success. So that's the premise of the book, the success and mistake. Below that, there's going to be certain sections and stages. If it's a nonfiction book like The Success and Mistake, as I've said, it's split up into 7 stages. So it's the 7 stages of your great mistake, and it includes shock and pain, as you will see on the screen there, the yellow post-its. If it's a fictional book, a novel, for instance, you might split it up into a few different I guess stages, the middle, the beginning, the middle, and the end. So every book, no matter what it is, there's always going to be these overarching stages. And these are the big things. These are the kind of big ideas. And I encourage you to use a particular color to get these first stages down. I personally use yellow post-its for my overarching stages. Like I say, for the success mistake, it involved these 7 stages: shock, pain. After pain, there was bargaining, and then came depression, then the tipping point, and then the latter couple of stages, which were all about overcoming adversity and turning it into acceptance. And the whole idea is that each one of these major sections might have anywhere from 2 to 3 or upwards of 7 or 8 chapters within it. And if you see on the screen there, just below shock, you will see a couple of pink post-its which demonstrate that, but we'll come to that next. Now, where does this all come in from the previous step of your bullet pointed list? Well, you had an idea for your book in your head, and you threw all those ideas onto a page in the form of bullet points. Now you move it onto the wall, where you're starting to think, right, what are my main stages going to be? So in that bullet pointed list, all those many different bullet points, you start to think of patterns. You start to think of the main overarching sections within your book. And it might be that in a novel, the beginning is set in a particular town, or it might be that the middle involves a particular set of characters, and the end might focus around a particular sort of thing that's going on around these main characters. So you'll be able to package it up into, a beginning, middle, and end. If it's a non-fiction book like The Success Mistake, it might be anywhere from 2 or 3 of these sections to 7, 8, 9, 10. It really is going to depend on your book and your idea and what it is that you hope to get from all this. And the whole point is to start taking those bullet pointed ideas and place them onto the wall so you can see them. So that's basically where it starts. You take them from a bullet pointed list to the board in post-it form. For The Successful Mistake, there were 7 of these stages, which leads us to the next area, the pink post-its. Now, I class these as your chapters. So if we think about this pyramid, and at the top of the pyramid is your book title, The Success, Mistake, and its premise. The next rundown are the stages. So there might be anywhere from a couple to a half a dozen of these main sections of a book. And then within each section of a book, there will be anywhere from a couple to, again, half a dozen or so chapters. So if we look at, for instance, this is the pink post-it's just below the pain post-it. The yellow post-it is pain, and just below that are the various elements of this pain. So emotional pain, financial, personal, physical. I think there's another one as well after that. So it's split up into 5 chapters. So within the pain section of The Success Mistake, there are 5 chapters. And I find that even when I'm writing a novel, if I have a beginning of my book and it's focused around a particular idea or a particular location, there will still be anywhere from a few chapters to half a dozen that very much focus around the beginning. And the beginning, these chapters will have a particular type of idea. They will focus on particular elements of a character, they will focus on particular elements of a plot, and they will have a very definitive objective from that, and it will differ from the middle and it'll differ from the end. So these chapters, again, although they flow into the overarching premise of a book, you can separate them. And again, you're taking all your ideas from the big bullet pointed list that you have. You will come up with all these ideas when you were brainstorming and just throwing these ideas onto the table, and now you're able to move them around and form a little bit of clarity. So we've gone from top of the pyramid, premise of a book and a book title, to the level below, the stages, to the level below that, chapters. And then there's a further level. And this is where the green post-its come in. And I classify this as all the miscellaneous ideas and topics and subheadings. So for instance, I start off the first chapter of the book within the stage of shock is the first stage of the Success Mistake is shock. And the first chapter within shock is the attributes of a mistake. And within that chapter of the attributes of mistake, there are 6 subheadings. And each one of these subheadings are like a mini blog post. They're around about 1,000 words long. And this makes it much easier to just break everything up for when you start your first draft. And these miscellaneous ideas and topics, they can surround titles, they could surround individual stories, or just individual little ideas that you have. They're all the little bits and pieces which aren't important enough to form an overall section or even an overall chapter, but you want to fit them in. And at the end of it all, you will have a white wall, or maybe a cupboard or a mirror, or however you want to do it. And it will just be full of these various post-its, and it filters down from yellow to pink to green. The yellows have various pinks under its umbrella, and each pink will have various elements under its little umbrella, being the green post-its. And this is exactly the same kind of process I take, whether it's non-fiction or fiction. So for the Success Mistake, like I say, there's 7 of these overall stages. Each stage has anywhere from 2 to 6 chapters. And each chapter will have anything from a couple of these miscellaneous ideas or subtitles to, well, 7, 8, 9, 10. It really does depend on the topic of that particular thing. If we take my most recent novel, I and Love You, it has a very definitive beginning, middle, and end to the book. And the beginning has a certain set of objectives, and the middle has a certain set of objectives, and as does the end. So again, the yellow post-its would be the beginning, middle, end. The pink ones would be the actual individual chapters. I rather than call them chapter 1 based on a particular date. I mean, the green post-its in this particular case, with it being a novel, would be, you know, maybe the actual plot, the individual locations. So if it was being set in a coffee shop, that would be a green post-it. If it involved Oz Dylan and Sam, that would be a particular post-it. If they were discussing a particular idea, that would be a green post-it. If I wanted to involve a particular kind of quote, that would be a green post-it. And the great thing about all this, and doing it offline rather than online, is that you're able to move them around. And because you've color coordinated them, you're not going to get mixed up, because the overarching stages of your book remain the overarching stages. So shock and pain may swap places. Shock may come after pain, or pain may come after bargaining, but it's not going to mess up the pink and the green post-its. Likewise, you might decide later down the line that you don't want that particular green post-it. Maybe it's a location in a bar. You don't want it in that chapter. You want to move it in a different chapter. Well, you can do so. And over the course of a few days or a couple of weeks, you will keep revisiting this board. You will keep revisiting that bullet pointed list of all these ideas, and you will add to it, and you will take away from it. You will move things around, but yellow will remain yellow, pink will remain pink, and green will remain green. And you'll get to a point after a little while where you're happy with the structure. And before we move on to the next stage, the actual creation, the first draft, when you actually start writing, I just want to talk a little bit about the book structure. Because I recommend you create a plan of action before you start your first draft, because it is important to do so. Otherwise, you're starting all willy-nilly. But don't go overboard. If it's too detailed, it gives you a little wiggle room moving forward, which is never a good thing, because whatever you start with undoubtedly does change once you begin writing and bringing everything together. But starting with no plan at all is equally dangerous, because you have no compass or direction. In other words, you wander around doing very little indeed. And this is where your book structure comes in. So hopefully everything that I've talked about, taking it from bullet point ideas and then bringing it onto a wall and splitting up into these 3 colors, shows you how you're not creating too detailed of a structure. You're not kind of putting yourself in a corner and saying, I'm going to have to write a book just like this and there's no wiggle room, because that's just going to ruin your creativity. But you're creating a compass, you're creating a direction, so you're able to sit down with your first draft and go, right, today I'm going to tackle these couple of chapters, and I know that they're going to focus on these particular topics or feature these particular characters, and I'm able to get through this one session and move on. Which brings us to the next point, the actual first draft. I personally use Scrivener for all my writing. I love how it helps break it down. At some point, you can move those offline ideas, because you might not want to dedicate an entire wall to these post-its forever and a day. So once you get it into a position where you're happy, you can move all these ideas online into Scrivener, so they are there at a moment's glance. It's a fantastic tool. And if you do want to write a book of some kind, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, short stories, whatever, I certainly recommend you check out Scrivener. It's been a true game changer for me and saved my bacon on many occasion. But beyond that, you need to start writing that first draft. So I suppose the most important thing about this particular page that you can see here is the word first. This is your first draft. It will not be perfect. And unfortunately, more often than not, it won't even be that good. But you have to begin somewhere, and you need to start getting those ideas onto the screen. So my biggest advice to you is, once you have that book structure in a place where you're happy-ish, start. So you've got your interviews and your notes, you've got that solid structure, you know what your plot's going to be and the characters that it's going to fit. Stop putting it off, just start going, make that move, do something. Now, I understand you want to make it perfect, but that comes later. That's what the whole editing process is going to be, and that's for a different discussion. Right now, your first draft is all about beginning. So for me, I like to split things up into chunks. Now, if we look at this, talk about that pyramid again. You've got the book, the success or mistake in this case, and its premise, ultimately what you want the book to achieve. Below that, you've got these 7 stages: shock, pain, bargaining, depression, etc. Within each one of these stages, so on the screen here, stage 1, shock, there are anywhere from a couple to half a dozen chapters in this case, attributes of a mistake and the warning signs. And then under each chapter, there are several topics / subheadings / little mini objectives. So for attributes of mistake, there's communication, hiring people, fear, growth and expansion, passion and purpose, external issues and decision making. And as I said earlier, each one of these mini subtitles, so in this case, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 under attributes of mistake. I split them up and look at them as a blog post. So I will look at it and go, right, each one of these blog posts needs to be somewhere around 1,000 words each. It might be that you've got a subheading under communication, you create maybe another layer. Maybe you bring out the blue post-its and put individual stories or go a next level. That's fine. And if you want to go another level or another 2 levels, that's perfectly fine. I like to keep it at 3 personally, but you can add a 4th or a 5th level. The idea is that you're adding to these, like you're niching it down, you're narrowing it down, and you're narrowing your focus. And the reason why splitting it up into chunks like this is easier because, well, you're able to sit down and say, this afternoon, Turn Dog, all you have to do is write 3 of these blog posts, each of which are 1,000 words each. So today I'm going to focus on communication, hiring people, and fear. I don't need to worry about any other aspect of the book. I just need to focus on these 3 things. I'm going to have to write 3,000 words, 3,500 words, and I've got 5 hours to do it. That is a much easier idea to digest than saying, well, I've got this 80,000 word book or novel to write, and I've got 3 months to write it. I don't know about you, but in those situations, I freak out. You don't know where to begin. And that's when you just start and you run yourself down a bad corridor, a corner you can't get out of. And then 3 months turn into 5 months, 6 months, and you feel like you're making no ground whatsoever. So hopefully you're able to see how this stage, the writing of your first draft, relates to the actual book structure. It is very much a pyramid. At top of the pyramid, you have that all-important book title, your premise, what you hope to achieve. Below that, you've got your book stages or main sections. Below that, you have your chapters. And under each one of those chapters, you have these individual topics or subheadings or ideas or locations or little plot holes or whatever it might be. And you're able to then, when starting that draft, go, today I am going to focus on just these little aspects. And depending on how much time you have, and depending on how fast you write, and depending on how soon into the journey you are, because sometimes it's difficult to get started, but then once you get a roll on, you're able to do more. You can say, today I'm going to tackle a couple of chapters, or today I'm just going to focus on 1. It makes digesting the entire experience an absolute breeze. Or maybe not a breeze, but it certainly makes it a great deal easier. So that is it. I'm going to just go off the screen sharing thing now, and I'm going to go back onto me. So you'll hopefully see my face. I'm going to just check my phone for emails. Hopefully you can see me again now. And yeah. There we go. So Leah, you said earlier that you couldn't see the chat bar. That is unfortunate. So I'm going to ask if you've got any questions or such to direct them to matt@turndog.co. So if you've got a question after all that, please send it now to matt@turndog.co. And I do know that Leah, you did mention earlier, so thinking of writing something in the next year or so, possibly a mashup historical, living and fictional examples, still figuring it out. So Leah, you are in a fantastic place right now because you've just got these ideas. So what I would recommend you do is create that bullet pointed list and start getting those ideas from your head onto paper, whether you use an app of some kind or whether you just use a piece of A4, hey, it really doesn't matter. It's all about getting your idea from this dreaded, chaotic mind of yours and into something cohesive. From there, you can start plotting out your main sections. You can start thinking, right, is there going to be a middle, beginning and end? In your case, it very much is a novel, I believe. So it's probably going to have a beginning, middle, and end. It might have more. And in terms of I Love You, it actually, funnily enough, fit in nicely to 3 chunks, the beginning, middle, and end. But I remember for Tick to the Talk, my second novel, there was around about 5 of these sections. There was a beginning, but then there was a like beginning to the middle, and then the real middle, and then the sort of after middle, and then the end. So I actually had 5 of these main sections, and within each of these sections, there's anywhere from a couple to half a dozen, or maybe even more, of these chapters. And then within each one of these chapters, there are certain ideas which include particular characters, or a particular location, or a particular this and that. And then once you have this structure and you've got in a place where you're somewhat happy, you're able to say, right, well, today I'm going to focus on these particular sections. And you can move forward and you can start making a dent. Whereas if you just try and begin and go, I've got a 60 or 70 or 80,000 word novel that I want to tackle, I mean, I don't know how you're going to do that. That is just like my worst nightmare. So I've got a question here. Again, Leah, thank you so much for your questions. Do you spend time reading books in the same area as your planned books? Thoughts on that? Yeah, absolutely. When it comes to the early stages, in particular, when I'm still trying to ferment that idea and get all of those things onto the bullet pointed list, then yes, I'm trying to read lots of books in that area. So Tick to the Talk is, and I Love You, and Barrett Parallel too, very much focus around the new adult and coming of age arenas. So around when I'm coming up with those ideas, I'll be reading people like John Green and Colleen Hoover. And there's a few reasons for this, I suppose. One of the reasons is that it just gives you a bit of a benchmark. You're able to see what they're doing and what their kind of readers would like. Because if you're trying to fit into that kind of place, it just gives you an idea of the sort of flow and this kind of words and the kind of structure to use. But I also find that if I do nothing but think about my own book and I just get lost in my own thoughts, then that can take me down a fairly dangerous path. So I like to read other people's works because it does help me broaden my horizons and go, well, this would make a really good story for me, but maybe it wouldn't necessarily connect with other people. Plus, you know, if you admire a particular author and they write a similar kind of style to you, you're always going to, well, enjoy a great deal of that, and it'll just throw on that inspiration and such. So yeah, I definitely do like to read books around that genre, although it's not always a bad idea to sometimes get out of your head. When I move further down the line and I'm sort of writing more of a second draft and third draft, a little bit like the position I'm in with I Love You right now, where it's just before it's about to get to editing. Sometimes I'll like to read books that have nothing to do with my genre, just because I'm so immersed into my story that I just cannot stand it anymore. I just want to escape. So the last thing I want to do is read a new adult book. I might want to read something completely different. So, but in the early days, especially with this stage, it sounds like you're at right now, Leah, I would certainly recommend you lose yourself in those particular genres and get some ideas. So I think you've got another question here as well. I'm just checking my email. Made lots of great notes from this. I'm in chaos mode right now. This has been really helpful. Well, I'm so glad you found it helpful. PS would be non-fiction, but actually drawing some lessons from fictional characters as well as real person case studies too, maybe. Oh, that is really interesting. Yeah, like I say, I thought it was, it sounded like it was going to be a fictional piece, but a non-fiction piece. That is exciting. And you could very much take the same approach. Like I say, I really fine-tuned this book structure process while getting fully to grips with the success or mistake. I used a similar process for my previous novels, but it was a little bit wishy-washy. I've made loads of trial and error over times. I've tried to just go straight from things in my head to the book and start writing. That did not work for me. I then tried to go complete anti that and write a really detailed report and go, this chapter is going to involve this, that, and the other from the get-go. And that didn't work because I found myself getting into the 7th or 8th chapter and going, well, now I want to change things, but I don't feel I can because I'm in a real strict regiment. So that didn't work. So over time, I've found that going into the offline world, putting the actual post-its on a wall like that's behind me, and then being able to move things around over the weeks makes things a great deal easier. At some point, you get to a point where you're happy, you can move it into a program like Scrivener and start to refine those ideas. But for me, the book structure its main aim is to do one thing, is to get you in a position where you're happy to start and split up your book into these manageable chunks, because you've got another life, you have other aspects of your job, and you might not be able to dedicate, every waking hour around your book. So it might be that you've got to choose the afternoon to do all your writing. Well, if you can dedicate 3 or 4 hours and go in knowing that you just have to tackle these 3 or 4 chapters, that's a much easier process to digest than saying, oh, well, today I've got an entire book to write and I'm just going to start writing and see where it goes. So I do find that giving yourself a compass, which this book structure is, does help a great deal. And I'd love to know if anyone else has any other questions. Oh, Leah, it looks like there's another one here. So thanks. At what point did you start doing your interviews for the Success Mistake? Was there a trial period of doing interviews before you knew exactly what the book would be? No, actually. I came up with the idea of a book to give you a bit of a background of the Success Mistake. I started my business, and it was that first morning. I had a huge to-do list of things to do. I was really excited. I'd done all this planning. I felt like I was ready, but I woke up that morning and I just froze. I didn't know where to start. It's like, who am I to be my own man? Like, I'm used to going into an office and having other people tell me what to do. I've got this to-do list. Who am I to say what's the priority? So even though I had this huge to-do list, I found myself doing very little indeed, which isn't ideal. Isn't ideal, because when you work for yourself, it's all about you basically getting to grips with your life. So I did the one thing which I thought I could actually manage, and it basically involved me reaching out to those I know who own their own businesses and they're entrepreneurs themselves and they work for themselves, and just asking, what advice do you have? So for the coming days, I had a lot of coffees. I jumped on Skype with a lot of people, and I realized everyone was sharing these stories about the times they'd failed and the mistakes they'd made, but not in a doom and gloom kind of way, more in a sense of this was a badge of honor. They were wearing it on their sleeve with pride. And I realized, well, actually, I've always had this rather proactive outlook on mistakes. I feel like you need to make mistakes in order to fulfill your potential. So I was like, well, this is exactly what I'm not doing right now. I'm scared of making these mistakes. And I realized everyone was telling me these stories. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be amazing, not only from a sense of me learning from these entrepreneurs, but what if I interviewed a couple hundred entrepreneurs about that big mistake and how they transformed it around and wrote a book about it? I personally learned a great deal along the journey, which I can most certainly tell you I did. I've learned so much. It's been like 163 little coaching calls. It's an invaluable number to it. But hopefully at the end of it, it's going to be a book that helps other people too. So I just dived into those interviews for right or wrong. I asked a few people about their thoughts, whether they thought it would be a book that would be good, how I should approach it. But I just started doing interviews. And I must say, the types of questions I asked in the beginning compared to how I asked them and what I asked at the end were different, I must say. There was certainly a different kind of approach along the way. But for the most part, it's been the same throughout. And I started doing those interviews and recording them, and just writing my overview notes. And a couple of years later, I had 163 of them. I was able to start writing the book, and I'm now probably around about halfway through the first draft. So still a long way to go, although edging ever closer. So I hope that answers your question, Leah. If you've got another question, please email me. If you've got another question as well, anyone else out there, email it at matt@turndog.co. I'm going to stay online, for at least another 5 or 10 minutes, and we can just chat. If you've got any other kind of writing questions, it doesn't have to be about book structuring. If you want to talk about your first draft or book marketing or how to format books, basically just ask away. I want to basically help you write your next book, whether it's a book idea you've already started or it's somewhere along the way. So feel free to ask, and I will help where I can. And I'll just throw this out there right now as well. I think I can share a link. I don't want this to be like a sales thing. I really did want to just jump online to share some things, but I do reserve a couple of coaching kind of slots each month, and I'm going to share a link here if I can figure out how to do it. I don't know if I can. Oh no, I'm going to try and figure that out now anyway. Okay, showcase, here we go. And Okay, I think I can showcase that. I think it'll load in. Hopefully you can see that. Anyway, the URL is basically turndog.co/1-on-1-brand-story. That's turndog.co/1-on-1-brand-story. And you can basically, if you like, sign up for a free Skype calls over a space of a month where we're able to talk. That page is all about brand story, but I have used the same format to work with people to help them on their writing, whether it's in the early stages of their book, they're trying to figure it out, or if it's in the latter stages and they're trying to format it and bring it to market. I'm always happy to help. And like I say, there's only a couple of slots. I don't do a great deal of it, but if it is of interest, just fill out the form, give me an email. And yeah, I've got a couple of slots for August and September. But yeah, let's get back to things, because Leah, you have emailed me again. Thank you so much, by the way, for all these great emails. Other people, don't be shy. Reach out to me, matt@turndog.co. Ask your questions. Thanks again for all the stories and advice. With so many case studies, did they all make it into the book? And do you worry about readers being overwhelmed with lots of case studies? That's my concern with my possible book idea. Okay, that is a really good question. When it comes to writing a book that involves other people, for me, there's kind of two types of approaches. The case study approach, where it becomes just a book of various individual stories. So, you know, in my case, I had 163 of them. It would just be like 163 chapters, maybe, of me introducing that story, writing a quick blog post about that thing. For me, that would be so boring. I mean, no, I just couldn't think of anything worse. Like, it would be useful for some. I suppose it would be a very valuable resource in some aspects. But in terms of a book, man, I just would not read that book. The other option is to create a narrative of it. It's a bit more of, I suppose, a journalistic approach, where you approach it and go, right. So, for instance, I was writing I'm currently in the depression stage 4, the depression stage, and I was writing one where it was the cooking pots, you know, when things, you know, you're hitting rock bottom. And I knew that this particular section would be around about 1,000 to 1,200 words long. And I had around about 7 or 8 of these success mistake interviews, these individual case studies that were relevant for this section. Now, from all the conversations that I've had over the years, I've been able to build up a particular sort of overview of particular things. So in this case, you know, depression hitting rock bottom, you know, how it affects people in different ways. I've kind of got my own ideas. So I'm able to build a narrative around that. I'm able to write that like I would a blog post. I'm able to come up with my ideas and my personal thoughts. And in doing so, I'm able to touch upon certain stories. In this case, there were about 7 or 8 of them, which I could touch upon for particular quotes and basing it around them. Now, I still feel using 7 or 8 would be massive overkill. So for each one of these individual sections, which are usually around about 1,000 to 1,200 words long, I try and focus on just 1 or 2 people. So out of this 7 or 8, I choose 1 or 2 which I felt had the biggest bang for the buck, the most interesting story, the most relevant, maybe something I had not touched upon before. So I'm not just touching upon the same people over and over. And I basically use them. I'm able to go in, I'm able to set the scene. I'm able to basically create a narrative. I'm talking about hitting rock bottom from my personal point of view, not necessarily a story about me, but I'm able to talk about it in a more sort of general sense of, this is what I feel goes on, this is how you overcome it, these are the sort of traits to look out for, etc. And in doing so, throughout this little piece, this 1,000-word piece, I'm able to touch upon a couple of stories. In this case today, it surrounded Tom Ewer and Johnny B. Truman. Their stories were very relevant to this particular chapter. I was able to be like, right, bang, I'm going to touch upon these guys, set the scene, involve a few of their quotes. And at the end of it, I have like 1,200 words. And yeah, it's rough around the edges. It needs work, but I'm able to touch upon these. So in your case, Leah, it hopefully answers both your questions in the sense of, did they all make them into the book? No. At the end of each section, I will say this section was influenced by A, B, and C. So if it touched upon 6 or 7 people who helped me write that book, I will write it there. But I don't include all the stories. And hopefully this means that the reader isn't getting totally overwhelmed to an extent where there's just 163 of these little case studies, because like I say, it's very difficult to learn anything from that. So the approach that I've taken for this is that it's an overall narrative. I want to take the reader through a journey from the beginning of a book all the way to the end, through these 7 stages of Your Great Mistake, and along the way be bringing out a few case studies, a few quotes, a few stories. So I'm not just talking about it from my own personal experience. I'm not just talking about it of like what takes my fancy on any given day. I'm able to base my opinion and my findings on all these 163 interviews as a collective, as an overall collective, and then draw upon individual ones as and when they're relevant. So hopefully people aren't overwhelmed, although, you know, there's still some editing to be done and some fine tuning. So I hope that answers that question. So yeah, if anyone else, we've got a few more minutes before we log off. If you're interested, just ask your questions at matt@turndog.co. And it would be fantastic if you've got any writing questions, even if it's not about structuring your book, if it's something to do with book marketing or what comes after that. That too would be super, super relevant. So I'll help in any way I can. A big thank you to Leah for all your amazing feedback and kind words, and also your questions. If anyone else has any, like I say, we've got a couple of minutes. And I suppose while I'm waiting for any more questions, rather than just sitting here and talking about nothing, I'll just kind of talk about some of the issues that I've had of late with writing the book. And even when you have a nice structure, it still is difficult. You'll hit roadblocks along the way. I don't like to look at it as, you know, writer's block. I like to think that I could always sit down and write about something. It's more a case of you've just got a bit of a roadblock in front of that particular story. And a lot of the time it comes down to fear. You're just a bit tepid about going online and just staring at the laptop. And it is difficult. It is really difficult. And I have those days and it's an absolute nightmare. And it's okay. You will get those. Creating a solid book structure, like everything we've gone through, isn't going to rid you of these little mini moments of, you know, writer's block per se. You'll still have them. But the great thing about having a book structure like this is you're able to go back to the beginning and say, okay, this particular section isn't working for me right now. I need to distance myself from it. Let's go back to the beginning, look at the bigger picture. And usually when you do that and you look at the bigger picture and you break it down into the various sections and you look at individual aspects, you're able to go, okay, I'm able to approach it from a fresh perspective with a new set of eyes. And you generally quite often battle your way through writer's blocks. As such, you don't necessarily go through it quite so long, although I've had a few rough patches along the way. But I've certainly found, since using a structure like this, those periods of writer's block, or however you like to term it, aren't as strong and aren't as prolonged. So, okay, we've got a question here. Leah, thank you so much. Really great, clever. At what point did you have a must finish by deadline by a publisher, maybe? Did this change things? Well, I'm a self-published author, so one of the great things about this and being a self-published author is you don't have those external deadlines by an agent or editor or a publisher. Now, that's not to say you shouldn't set yourself deadlines, and I'll give you a bit of an insight into how I approach deadlines. Sometimes, depending on your book, depending on how big it is, you're able to set yourself a tight deadline. If it's a smaller book and you really are to grips with it, I think it's a good idea from the get-go to set yourself a deadline. So if it's a short story or a guide, you could say, right, I want to have a finished article in 6 weeks. And then you're able to reverse an engineer and say, right, I need to have a first draft ready for, 2 weeks time, however it might be. I think for a larger body of work, especially something like The Successful Mistake, where it was so big and it involves so many people, and because it involved other people, I wanted to make sure it was really tight and it does it justice. I, at first, set myself a deadline, totally, like race past it. It was like, it was never going to happen. And although that is a bit of a kick in the teeth, you want to you set yourself a deadline, you want to live up to it. It's more important about than actually doing the body of work justice, doing your book justice. So for bigger bodies of work, I don't like to set myself a deadline until I get through that first draft. Now, sometimes you have to set yourself mini deadlines within that. So if you're struggling a little bit or maybe procrastinating, it's like a case of, okay, I'm going to finish the first chapter or maybe the first section of a book of this first draft by the end of the month, because that's just going to kind of give you a kick in the teeth. But while you're still writing a first draft of a big 80,000 word novel or a big 80,000 word nonfiction book, to say I'm going to publish in September before you've even started, that's a lot of pressure to put on you. And I don't care whether you're writing your first book or this is your 50th book. That is a lot of pressure to go around, especially if you've got another job or other aspects of your job. So I like to set myself mini deadlines while I'm writing that first draft. Then once I get through the first draft, I feel more often than not more comfortable about saying, okay, I think I'll be able to publish in such and such month. However, I will often hold off from announcing it to the world. I'll have an idea in my head, but I won't announce it to the world until I've had that initial critique off an editor. So I'm going to move away from The Successful Mistake and to my upcoming novel now, I Love You. I wrote the first draft. It took me a lot longer than any other novel has. It was a tough book to write. It was a beast. I went through the second draft rather quickly, and I'm now just about to sign off on an editor. So this time next week, I should have that critique. I've got an idea in my head when I want to release I Love You. I'm not going to say it right now, and I've not told anyone else. I've got an idea in my head of when I want to do it. Once I've got that critique back from the editor, I will have a really good idea of whether making those changes is going to take me a matter of weeks or a matter of months. If it's going to be a matter of weeks, I might turn out next week and then go, okay, I've looked at these critiques. I think I'll be able to overcome these by, the middle of next week or in a fortnight. Then it's just a case of copy editing, proof reading, sending it out to beta readers and such and such. I think I can do all that and be able to publish by mid-November, bang. So it might be that at that stage, you set yourself a hard deadline and go, announce it to the world, I Love You will be launched on the 16th of November. But until I get that critique back, I'm loath to put a hard deadline, because those critiques, I might look at it and go, oh my God, this is like 2 months worth of work. Like, she wants the entire thing changing. Like, even though I don't have to change it because I'm a self-published author, you hire an editor for a reason. It's all about turning good into great. On my own, I'm capable of creating good, but I can only create great by involving other people, i.e. in this case, an editor. So once I get that critique back by the end of next week, I should be in a position where I'm able to say, right, I Love You will be published on this date. Right now, I'm continuing setting myself deadlines for The Successful Mistake. I have an accountability partner for The Successful Mistake to make sure I'm plugging and continuously getting through the first draft. Once I finish that first draft, I'll probably have an idea in my head of when I want to publish, but I won't announce that to the world until I get that initial critique back from the editor. So I hope that answers your questions. Like, deadlines are important, and whether it's an external party like an editor giving them you, or whether it's you yourself giving them you, unimportant. Like, deadlines are important. However, I personally wouldn't put too much pressure on yourself unless you have to with that big book. If it's a smaller book, fine, but if it's a bigger body of work, if you think you can do it in 6 months, it will almost certainly take 9 months. It's just how it goes, I am afraid. So really good question, Leah. Thank you so much. And yeah, deadlines are a real beast, but yeah, they are good and they help keep you on top. So, well, we are approaching 5 to the hour. I'm going to log off in just a couple of minutes. So if there is any final questions, Leah, if you've got a final question, please send it through. If anyone else does, send it to matt@turndog.co. And if there aren't any further questions, that is perfectly fine. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you've taken some value from this. I know I've probably rambled on a little bit in my Yorkshire accent, but yeah, this is kind of a process I take with my book structure. You want to create a compass. You don't want to tie yourself into a definitive thing. I did that before. It's not good. I've tried to sit down and just write. That's not good either. This for me is a happy medium. Combining the online and offline world helps as well. And if you're able to split these chunks, your first draft into chunks, it's a far more attainable goal. So that is basically it. It looks like we've got one final email from Leah. Lots of brilliant advice I've never have thought of. No more questions from me this evening. Just want to say thank you. Leah, thank you for watching and being part of this. I really do appreciate it. And if you have any other further questions later down the line, you've got my email. Reach out whenever you can. And like I say, I think the link is being showcased. If anyone does want to have a more one-on-one coaching call, I offer over a space of a month free Skype calls that we set some objectives and we say, right, over a month, we're going to achieve A, B, and C. And I can hopefully help you achieve those goals in a more proactive and detailed manner. But that's pretty much it. So I'm going to log off now. Thank you so much for joining me. Have a fantastic Friday. What are we on? Thursday night. Thursday night. Have a fantastic Friday and weekend ahead from me. Cheers. Bye.